Hello, everyone. I am Ana Nieto. I'm head of the Species Conservation Action Team here at IUCN. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. It's great to see you all here. So before we begin, I want to remind you that the webinar will be conducted in English with simultaneous French translation. To activate French translation, simply click on the planet icon at the bottom of your Zoom window and select the language. I hope that you find that easily. So today we will be focusing on monitoring species for conservation, and species monitoring is central to nature conservation. Data on species population size and trend, habitat, ecological requirements, and threats is needed to plan and implement conservation actions. Scientists, NGOs, local communities, donors, and even businesses, they all have strong reasons for monitoring species. Scientists and NGOs utilize monitoring to identify threatened species, design conservation projects, and track key indicators. Local communities rely on species monitoring to manage their natural resources effectively, and donors require species monitoring to track the impacts of their investments. However, there are many challenges involved in the collection and use of data for monitoring and decision making, including issues of capacity, of harmonization of methods and protocols, data accessibility, resource availability. So today at this webinar, we're going to address these issues by exploring different approaches to species monitoring, discussing common challenges and potential solutions, and examining how data can be effectively used to inform decision-making processes. We're going to hear lessons learned from 3 conservation projects from different mammal species. These are projects that are funded by the Save Our Species program and the Integrated Tiger Habitat Conservation Program. And additionally, we will tap into the expertise of the IUCN Species Survival Commission Species Monitoring Specialist Group. So let's dive right into the topic. Allow me to introduce you to our facilitator today, Dr. PJ Stephenson, who is chair of the IUCN SSC Species Monitoring Specialist Group and also research fellow at the University of Lausanne here in Switzerland. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you find the webinar informative and inspiring, and the floor is yours, PJ.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you very much indeed as well for inviting me to facilitate this next webinar in the SOS series. So next slide, please. So thank you all for joining. I'm just going to set the scene a little bit before we hear from our invited speakers. So I'm just going to highlight and go into a bit more detail some of the issues that Anna just touched on. Next. So as Anna said, I'm chair of the IUCN SSC Species Monitoring Specialist Group. And here when we talk about species, we're not just talking about mammals or just animals, we're also talking about plants and fungi. And our mission is to enhance biodiversity conservation by improving the availability and use of data, not only on the species and their populations themselves, but also on their habitats and on their threats. Next. So the group has sets up a range of different projects, or 120 odd volunteers from around the world. We set up projects to help us deliver our objectives on building capacity in different user groups, developing and sharing tools and methods, improving data collection and use, and also enhancing data sharing, and advancing work on less well-known species. Next. So I think the key point to note is our concern is very much part of what we're discussing today. When we talk of monitoring, what we need to worry about is not just the point of collection where somebody is recording a species, but also how we analyze and share that data and how we use it for decision making. Next. So just to recap, maybe this is obvious, but who needs biodiversity data? Next. So we're talking about mammals today, and numerous people manage, protect, and restore mammal populations. That's from government departments to local communities to NGOs and increasingly companies striving for sustainability. All of these stakeholders need data to monitor the progress of their projects, their programs, and their policies in order to apply adaptive management so that we can learn from what's working well and replicate it, and we can learn from what's not working so well and try and improve it. But what this means, and as we've summarized in a recent paper, what this actually means is in many cases, data users need the same information about species, whatever sort of stakeholder group they're in, whether you're a government, community, NGO, it doesn't matter, you need the same sorts of information. Next. So what sort of data are we talking about then? Well, the key one, I guess, for species is the status of the species. And here what we most commonly need in terms of information is presence or absence, so we can assess exactly where they're distributed. Also abundance or density, so that's how many of the animals are there, or how many are there in a given area. And we also need to know more about the habitat these animals are in, the extent of the habitat and the quality of the habitat. What we also need to know about are the threats to biodiversity and to species. So we need to keep an eye on what is threatening these species, whether it's poaching, whether it's habitat loss, whether it's the prevalence of invasive species. We need to keep an eye on these pressures. It's also important for conservationists to track how well their actions and policies and strategies are working. This is what we call the responses. And so it's also very important to measure those as well. And last but not least, it's increasingly important to understand and to monitor the value of nature and its contribution to people and people's livelihoods. And this whole selection of pressure states, response benefits is a sort of framework of information, of indicators that the biodiversity world and the conservation community is increasingly using to monitor its impact. Next. So how do we collect all of these different sorts of data? Well, historically, we used what we call traditional observer-based methods, which put quite simply is we went out and tried to find the animals. And I'm focusing on animals, remember, today, but the same is true of plants and fungi. Historically, we went out on land or under the water to try to find and observe these species. And sometimes as well, we try and trap them as we might have to for smaller mammals. Next. But of course, increasingly now we're in the 2020s, technology is coming on fast, and we are now increasingly using different sorts of sensors, different sorts of cameras, different sorts of audio devices to detect species. We're deploying them increasingly in the air, in aircraft and drones, and also increasingly underwater. And also with advancements in DNA technology, we're also monitoring species from samples of water or soil or air. So we know what sort of information we need. We have a good idea of the sorts of things we can do to collect it, but we haven't got it all sussed. There are still a number of challenges and blockages to effective species monitoring. And a lot of that revolves around the availability of data and capacity. Now, I just want to give you what I think is one of the best examples to demonstrate this issue. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility has a global database of, last time I looked, about 2.3 billion species records. That's records of where species have been recorded around the world. And if we can show the map, this is a heat map off of the GBIF website, which shows you the redder areas are where we have more data. And as you can see from the heat map, essentially most of the data that we have are in Western Europe and North America. We also have other little hubs such as Southern Africa and Eastern Australia. Now, this is great, but of course that means most of the data on biodiversity are in temperate latitudes. But of course, as you all know, most of the biodiversity is in tropical latitudes. So our challenge here is to overcome this gap and try and ensure that data and capacity are in the places where we find more of the biodiversity. Next. So as well as geographic biases, we have taxonomic biases in data and capacity. We're talking about mammals today. For mammals, there are fewer data, for example, on marine and aquatic species, on smaller species, and on species in tropical forests. And as a result, even though mammals are among the best studied taxonomic group around, we still do not know the conservation status of 14% of the mammals on the planet. Next. So as Anna touched on at the beginning, there are a number of causes behind these challenges we face. The first one is that projects do not have strong indicators or monitoring plans. Often people don't know what methods to use, or they're not using appropriate methods and tools. So methods can be very unharmonized. Sometimes the same project, people will be doing different things to try and monitor the same species. There are also various technical and political issues around data sharing. Also, as we've touched on, there is often inadequate resources or human capacity invested in monitoring. And frequently, the people collecting the data are not talking with the people who are using the data to make decisions. And as a result of that, often or not, if decision makers get any data, it's not in the right format, of good enough quality, or at the right time for them to be able to use it in their decision making. Next. So my group has been looking for the last few years to try and unpack a lot of the challenges and understand them and look for solutions. And a few years ago, I worked with some colleagues from IUCN to actually review the SOS portfolio. Next. And what we found in this review of lessons there, we also saw that in the SOS project portfolio, we also have these taxonomic and geographic biases in data. We also found that, in fact, very few projects are collecting any population data. There is quite a lot of data on threats and other things, but not much on population data. And so what we suggested that was that more effort is invested to build capacity for monitoring and the use of suitable pressure state response benefit indicators. And last but not least, we underlined the importance of sharing lessons. We're not going to get better at monitoring conservation projects if we don't talk to each other, share our lessons, what's working well, what's not working so well. So this is very much, next slide, this is very much the aim of the webinar today. It's to explore the challenges people have with monitoring species. It's to try and look at how people have overcome those challenges, what solutions they found. And it's also trying to get a bit of an insight in how data can be used to inform decision making. And we're going to look at lessons from three projects funded by the IUCN Species Program. Now, today we are focusing on larger mammals. As I said, larger mammals, larger terrestrial mammals, are generally among the better known and better studied and often the better monitored species. So what can we learn from that? If that is indeed the case, what can we learn from the people that are out there on the ground trying to monitor large mammals that are the subject of important conservation projects? And today, I'm very pleased to say that we're going to hear from Sébastien Pinchon of Association Noé on Addax populations in Chad and Niger. We're going to hear from Tashi Dhendup from Bhutan's Department of Forests and Parks. And he's going to be talking about tiger monitoring. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Soary Randrianjafizanaka, who is going to talk to us about lemurs in Madagascar. So how we're going to run this, now it's a discussion session. So what we'll do is we will let the speakers run through their sessions, tell us about the lessons from their sites. I will then ask them to elaborate a little bit on a key issue or two that we have had as a topic for the workshop. We will also then start taking your questions. Now we're expecting a lot of people. We already have almost 230 people on this call. We're not going to be able to get to all your questions, but if you do have a question, if you can put it in the relevant chat box, the IUCN team will then try and get those to me, and we'll try and answer some of those as well. So I hope that's clear. I hope we've set the scene. And so without any further delay, I'd just like to hand over to Sébastien Pinchon, who is going to talk to us about the work of Association Noé. Thank you, Sébastien.
Thank you very much. So I'm pleased to be here with you. And so I will present to you the lessons learned during the monitoring of the Addax in Niger and Chad in the framework of our project for the SOS African Wildlife. This project lasted 30 months. It was located in the reserve of Termite and Tintuma in Niger, the biggest terrestrial protected area in Africa, 86,215 square kilometers, huge, plus its periphery, so it's more than 3 times the size of Belgium. And also we work in Chad at the border between Niger and Chad. The main objective was to conserve the last population of Addax in the wild with monitoring system, protection system, and involvement of the communities, of course. The Addax, why the Addax? The Addax is critically endangered, certainly one of the most endangered mammals on Earth in the wild. It's an antelope just perfectly adapted to desert with a unique knowledge of this ecosystem. They can smell water at more than 100 kilometers to go there and find pastures. They can find tubers in the sand, and their population is very low, is critically endangered, as I told you. Certainly around 50 individuals left in the wild. If you want to be optimistic, maybe up to 100 at the maximum. Next. So, as you can see, they were widely spread, sorry, in Sahara, maybe 60 to 80 years ago. And now they were only known in 2 locations at the beginning of the project due to the work of Noé since 2015. And so the population decreases a lot, and we had the data in the reserve of Termite-Tintuma in its periphery and at the border, not other data at all. So, of course, we needed to monitor this population to find out more evidence and to confirm the density of the population and to identify threats and the distribution of this population. So, next. So, we work on a monitoring system with, of course, motorized missions, terrestrial missions with 4WD vehicles. It's, as you can understand, that we are in the middle of desert. It's very difficult to cross this landscape. And so it needs a heavy logistic with, of course, security measures with forestry agents. And in the framework of these missions, we follow transects that have been identified decades ago, or 10 years or 20 years ago. We plan also to use a solar drone that should have been able to cover up a large area in one flight, up to 7,000 square kilometers. And we plan to implement an aerial survey in Chad at the border. In fact, we're talking about a huge area where we do transect, but of course, where we need to explore to find out evidence of presence or absence. But we faced security issues in Chad and Niger with a lot of smugglers related to the regional security context with Libya, Mali, Nigeria. The fact, of course, rebels from Jado, they hide in the Tintuma desert where are located the Addax. Just to remind you, the fact that are the rebels that killed the President Déby in Chad. So it forced us to postpone and cancel a lot of activities, of monitoring activities, such as the aerial survey in Chad. We faced also desertic conditions, weather conditions. For instance, the solar drone was tested in the Australian bush, but not in Sahara, and in Sahara it's worse than in Australian bush. More dust, more sand, high temperature, and the battery and the solar panels were not adapted enough. So after 5 flights, the solar drone was just out of order. So we try to adapt and to find solutions to these situations. So we tried to identify another aerial survey that was planned in the Tintuma Desert in the framework of the project funded by the CMS and the Germany Ministry of Environment, but with no result due to weather conditions. And we think that we needed to go there on the field, to be present on the field, even with security measures. So we thought about camelback patrols, monitoring patrols. Next. So we identified in the framework of our project first that we could organize camelback patrols with community agents just in order to raise awareness, to gather information, testimonies of presence or absence of Addax in order to help to organize monitoring missions. So we thought that these camelback patrols were certainly the only way for us to collect data on the field with these security issues and context, with people coming from communities that are used to cross these landscapes. So we transformed these patrols in long patrols of 33 to 45 days. So we implement 4 of these patrols in Chad and 2 of these patrols in Niger. And it helped us to collect a lot of data. As you can see, it's a certain amount of organization, but it helped us a lot. And thanks to that, we gather data and it helps us to understand where are the Addax, what are the threats, and what we need to do. Next. So here are the lessons learned for the future of the Addax. So first, we confirm that it has been heavily poached at the border between Niger and Chad 20 years ago. We found out there amount of horns, amount of schools. So it was very sad, but we observed a lot of juveniles during this monitoring and few evidence of recent poaching. So that's good news, certainly a sign of hope, if we can say, because we need hope for this species. And it helps us also to estimate, to confirm the estimation of the size of the population. We know for sure that we have 2 nucleus of population of Addax, certainly a third one. So one in the Tintuma Desert, near at the periphery of the reserve of termite and Tintuma, and one at the border between Chad and Niger. But all the observations of Addax and all presence of evidence of presence of the Addax have been collected in Niger and not in Chad. So for us, at the end of the project, we concluded that all the Addax were at this moment based located in Niger. So you have around 35 Addax left in the Tintuma Desert, and certainly 10 to 20 at the border between Chad and Niger. So it's a minimum of 50, 60 Addax left in the wild, plus a third nucleus population of Addax in the north of the Tintuma Desert. Very difficult to estimate the size of this nucleus. And we collected information and data on the presence of Addax in the north of Niger, in the north of Chad, but also it's so huge, it's so difficult to go there, and the security issues are worse than in the Tintuma Desert and in the reserve and at the border, that it's just impossible to confirm. So based on that, so just to finish then, based on that, we identify 2 priorities for conservation and a general context. So we identify that, of course, the security issues in the region result in opportunistic poaching and a growing interest in wildlife trafficking, and especially the Dama gazelles, but the Addax. Since several months, we identify that people are interested in Addax from Libya, and it's a real threat for this species. Plus, we also observed during this project that due to the climate change, in 2021, there were no rain at all, or almost no rain at all in Niger and in the deserts. And so it conducted to the loss of a lot of pastures for the Addax and the antelopes. So they spread they left the habitat they were used to, and so we lost the sight of the Addax, and it was a real threat for the species at this moment. And it can explain why also we didn't find any Addax during the aerial survey implemented in early 2022 with the project funded by the CMS. So based on that, we identified two priorities. First, support the reserve of Termitite in Tumal that is in charge of protecting and conserving the Addax in the wild in Niger. It has been identified by the Ministry of the Environment in Niger for this. So this reserve will need to get aerial means, terrestrial anti-poaching patrols, and camelback patrols for monitoring. It's very important. It's the only way to go there and to monitor and protect the species. And on the long term, the population is so low that we need to reinforce it, but we need to reinforce it with a program of reproduction in captivity with animals captured in the wild. It's very important to understand that the genetic diversity of this species in the wild is very high, while it's very low in the captive population. In fact, you have between 5,000 to 7,500 Addax in the world in captivity, but the genetic diversity of this captive population is very, very low. So it will be very difficult, and it won't help the population in the wild if we wanted to reinforce this population with captive animals. So we need to create a captive population, but based on wild animals, and then reinforce it. So it has been stated and discussed with the SSS IUCN specialist group for the antelopes. And
okay, Sébastien, I need to. Are you about to wrap up?
Yep, I finished.
Okay. No, sorry to interrupt your flow.
No, do not worry. It's okay. I just finished. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and I will be glad to answer questions after that.
Thank you, Sébastien. Well, it's nice to see that in spite of all the challenges you faced trying to operate in this extreme environment, that you've still managed to get data of use in your planning for this species. So thank you. Just a reminder as we move to the next speaker, and I invite Tashi to start to tell us about tigers in Bhutan, that if you have questions for the speakers, please put them in to the chat box and we'll get to some of those later. Anyway, over to you, Tashi.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you all. Without wasting any time, I'll jump right into the presentation. So in my presentation, firstly, I'll be talking about the project that we secured from the Integrated Tiger Habitat Conservation Program. And then I will be talking about the tiger monitoring approaches and methods that we currently use in Bhutan. And then lastly, I'll be talking about the challenges. So we got a project from the Integrated Tiger Habitat Conservation Program in 2015 with a grant amount of 600,000 euros for a period of 3 years. And we implemented the project in Royal Manas National Park, which is located in the southern part of the country. It has an area of just over 1,000 kilometers square. But despite the small area, Royal Manas is one of the most biodiverse areas in the country. It is a hotspot of wild felids. We have 7 species of wild cats coexisting together. The park is well known for its tigers and a rich prey base. And just across the border in India, we have the Manas National Park. So our project is one of the smaller ones from the ITSCP and was titled Securing the Future of Tigers in the Bhutan Manas Complex. And the project was aimed to ensure that tigers in the Bhutan the RMNP, Royal Manas National Park area, persist into the future and serve as a source population for tigers within the wider Indo-Himalayan region. To achieve this objective, we had several areas of focus that included monitoring of tigers and prey, habitat restoration, preventing and handling tiger poaching, mitigating human-tiger conflict, and providing assistance to the affected communities in terms of providing incentives, as well as alternative sources of livelihood, including ecotourism. Next slide, please. So the project investments were broadly categorized into two. We had livelihood-based investments that focused on the communities, and then we had the conservation-based investment that included tiger monitoring, anti-poaching activities, and habitat preservation. So out of the many livelihood-based investments, one which became very popular and effective is the Hunter to Hermit program. So there is a village called Norbugaon, which is located to the eastern side of the national park, and the people there are mainly dependent on poaching as a means of their livelihood. So in 2018, on the International Tiger Day, with the funding support from the project, we initiated this program, Hunter to Hermit, where about more than 20 poachers, they gave up hunting. And then with support from the project, we organized religious discourses for these people, built meditation homes, bought Jersey cows, and distributed electric fencing and so on. And even when they were distributing these Jersey cows, they had an idea of how to do it. So they called it no cost sharing, but calf sharing. So alternative female calves born to seed cows. So initially 4 poachers were given with the Jersey cows, and then the alternative female cows born to the seed cows are distributed to their colleague poachers, and then this goes on until it reaches the last poacher. So it became very popular. The farmers are now earning from the sale of dairy products, and it has also reduced the number of free-ranging cattle heads in the forest. And even after the project has ended, donors continue to pump money into that community. And then conservation-based investments, as I mentioned before, we have all these anti-poaching activities, monitoring of tigers and prey population. We did it under this head. Next slide, please. So from the project, we generated 2 types of data. We had the camera trap data from the annual monitoring of tigers. And initially during the start of the project, we also carried out socioeconomic survey. So we have that data as well. But here, when I talk about tiger monitoring, I'm not just talking specific to that project or that project area, but how we carry out monitoring of tigers across the country. So the first one is camera trapping. So camera trapping is the most popular and widely used tool to monitor tigers and other species in the country. The nationwide tiger survey, which is conducted every 5 years, we use camera traps. We did it in 2015, and very recently we have just completed with our second nationwide tiger survey using camera traps. The results will be out very soon. And then we also carry out annual monitoring in few selected protected areas and field divisions using camera traps. And some of the ways that we have used these camera trap data is like we have recorded incidences of poaching. So that helps us to, identify areas where anti-poaching activities needs to be focused on. And even in terms of the knowledge on the ecology of tigers in Bhutan, we have been able to record long-term dispersals of tigers. Now, tigers from Royal Manas National Park, which is located in the south, they have been recorded in Jigme Dorje National Park, which is in the north. And as you can also see on the slide, we even use the camera trap images to compare the poached tiger skins from our national tiger database. So we are able to tell whether, these tigers are from Bhutan or not. Nowadays, our colleagues in the field also use this spatial monitoring and reporting tool. In short, it's known as SMART. And then it is an app that you can install on your phone and then in your laptop. So when our field colleagues and our rangers, when they go to the field, they record poaching incidences and signs of animals, tracks, and so on. And then this data is then used to map out species distribution. Is also used to map out, the hotspots of poaching. So principally, the park management uses this data to map out these poaching hotspots, and then they plan their anti-poaching activities according to that. Besides this, it has also been used for other purposes as well. The SMART app, once turned on, when you are traveling in the field, it records your movement, it records the number of days you are in the field and the location. So it helps to quantify our conservation efforts, like the distance covered, the day spent in the forest. So it helps to justify our budget. So it's very, very helpful. Next slide, please. So very recently, we have also started using conservation genetics. to understand our tigers. So we are using it to not only count tigers, but also to understand their genetic diversity and gene flow. Now, genetics can also play a very crucial role in providing insights into poaching hotspots. So in a very recent paper, we highlight that all tiger skins and bones that we seized in the country within the last 5 to 6 years, they were very genetically similar to the tigers from Bhutan. So we think that these tigers were either poached from Bhutan or from a genetically similar tiger population in the nearby region. So in order to understand it better and improve this, we need to develop a comprehensive database with the genetic profiles of all the tigers as much as we can from Bhutan. Then we also use the radio telemetry. So a Bhutanese team has been collaring tigers in Bhutan for the last 4 to 5 years, and we have been able to collar about 5 tigers. And from this data, we aim to understand their habitat use, movement, and dispersal. Now, radio telemetry not only for tigers, but we have even done it for elephants. So in the southern part of the country, we have a border town known as Kelifu. So that area is facing a lot of human-elephant conflicts. So there we have few elephants collared. Now the government is planning to build elephant corridors. So we are using that data to understand these the movement of these elephants and then be able to build that corridors better. So with all this camera trap data, genetic data, and then the data that we are getting from SMART, we are using this data for like when we are carrying out zonation of parks, it helps us to decide which areas should be kept as buffer zones, which area should be kept as code zone and multiple use zones. So we are using for that. And we are also using this data to when we are carrying out the preparation of management plans for the parks. So we use that data for that purpose as well. Next slide, please. So key lessons and challenges. So what worked well? So far, camera traps have been very, very effective, and it has served their purpose extremely well. We are yet to test genetics at a full scale. Very recently, again, we had the nationwide snow leopard survey, and for that also we used the camera traps. But at the same time, when our colleagues were there in the field to set up camera traps and to retrieve camera traps, we have also been collecting scats. So we are now also trying to see how to understand, use this genetics to better understand the snow leopards in Bhutan as well. So we have also started using eDNA. And some of the challenges are in Bhutan, our terrain is very difficult. It is very remote. So when we are there in the field to set up camera traps, just to set up one camera trap, you have to travel, like walk for 4 or 5 hours at least. So it's very, very tedious, is a very tedious job. And then genetics in the south is also challenging because of, we have a lot of this humidity, moisture, the climate is very, very challenging. And for Bhutan, accessibility to facilities is also very constraining to, carrying out all these monitoring activities. We have a lack of a well-furnished and dedicated laboratory space. So all the scans, any kind of genetic work that we want to do here in Bhutan, we basically just collect the samples and then we have to send it outside the country. And then that involves, you have to do a lot of CITES work and other documentation work. And we also have challenges like buying reagents. Now, if you want to do DNA extraction within the country, again, you need to have access to this reagent. So we can't find it here in Bhutan, so we have to import it from the outside. Even camera traps, batteries, and SD cards. So it's very time consuming and very costly. We also have a lack of capacity. We only have a handful of people who are really trained into doing all this wildlife biology work, in data analysis. Our field colleagues are basically trained in the field work. They know how to do this sample collection, how to set up camera traps, how to organize the data. But when it comes to data analysis and then publishing of the results, it is a challenge for us as well. And then, of course, resource availability in terms of funding is a big challenge for Bhutan as well. So that's it from me. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tashi. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that was fascinating, and I think you highlighted very well. It's very impressive array of methods you're now using to monitor tigers. But I think, for those people who have said, these big charismatic, well-funded species are you know, the ones we know most about. I think you also highlighted the fact that even with species like tigers that have been worked on for years, there are still challenges. And I think you highlighted some of those very well there as well. So thank you very much. I would just thank you. I've seen in the chat, some people are very helpfully putting in links to some of the tools that the speakers are mentioning. So thank you for that. But also don't forget to put in the chat any questions you have for me or the speakers as well. But let us go on then to our last presentation. So Soary, if I can ask you then to tell us about lemurs.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Soary Randrianjafizanaka. I represent Fanamby, which is an organization mandated by the ministry to manage 5 protected areas. Between 2019 and 2022, Fanamby benefited from SOS Lemur to finance various activities such as restoration, conservation, brigade, and including lemur monitoring. Next slide, please. One in the North region, which is in a protected area of Loky Manambato, who monitoring Propithecus tatersadi for a total budget of 200,000 Swiss francs, and one in the Western region, which is a protected area of Menabe and Antimena, who monitoring Microcebus verte for a total budget of 100,000 Swiss francs. Next slide, please. For Loky Manambato, a transect of 2 kilometers and one plot of 20 x 20 meter was installed in the 70 sites, so a total of 70 transects. And we have inventoried 15,461 individuals divided in 3,064 groups. For Menabe and Antimena, through transect of 1 kilometer was installed in 4 sites, plus currently who have also 15 transects and permanent, making a total of 24 transects in all 5 sets of the forest block. So we found a total density of 21 ING kilometer square of Madame Verte. Next slide, please. For Loky Manambato, the challenge were training community in monitoring and data collection, and even they are not scientific people, and also use this data in our strategic decisions sometimes. But finally, information collected suggests that there is an overpopulation of Propithecus tatersadi, so they are not in danger anymore. This distribution area go to the next protected area, which is protected, which is managed by Fanamby also, and the name of this protected area is Antimena and Addax. So now collaboration between the 2 protected areas is underway to be able to continue ecological monitoring of these lemurs in the new range. Next slide, please. For Menabe and Antimena, the hardcore next slide. For the Menabe and Antimena, the key lesson is for the hardcore. The challenge for Menabe and Antimena is insecurity. There is a high insecurity, and monitoring is very risky, and scientific team organized work with local community and sometimes with gendarme or with military. The habitat is very fragmented due to the different pressure, but we are able to identify individuals of Madame Verte there. We have some different species in the same area, and it make identification to confusion. So we have especially scientific STEM, but no community who collecting data for monitoring and reduce the risk of confusion with the other species of mouse lemur living in the same distribution area. And before 2020, we found Madame Verte only in the Current forest, But after the rumor starting that Madame Bird was completely disappeared from Menabe and Antimena, in 2021, we decided to monitoring all the hardcore out. Before 2020, we found Madame Bird only in Kiringi. But after the romance starting that Madame Bird has completely disappeared from Menabe and Antimena, in 2021, we decided to monitoring out for and out the Black Forest. So we found Madame Bird in 4 another sites. And for now, we have an update on the real distribution area of Madame Bird. Now we think to what we have to think to identify the reason why Madame Bird disappeared in the Kiringi Forest block, despite the 15 transects already exist and we survey and monitoring all the time, and why the species were found in 4 another sites around the hardcore. So we are looking for finals so we can continue the monitoring. So this is the key lesson of Menabe, Antimena, and Loky Manambato that we can share us what in Loky Manambato we have an overpopulation of Propithecus tatarsalis, and we have a distribution of Madame Bird who live also in other block forests of the hardcore, but not only in the Kiringi forest block. So thank you very much for the sharing. We can have a response question if you have after this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Soary, thank you very much. And again, and thank you everyone for bearing with us with our technical challenges. As I said, we have people calling in here from remote locations, but I'm sure you took away a lot of the key messages, which are summarized very nicely here by Soary. And again, I think what we've seen here is a primate-related project that is also using a diversity of methods, and again, some working better than others, but again, methods that are nonetheless allowing the team to make some key decisions. So if I could now ask all of the speakers to put their cameras on, and we will sort of form a virtual panel. And then people might want to put either a gallery view. I'm not sure if we're going to get a gallery view on the main screen. Okay, so I mean, I think what we've heard from our 3 speakers hopefully gave you all some insights. And as I said at the start, even though large mammals are often felt to have perhaps even more attention, perhaps even an unfair slice of the resource cake, if you like, it's still nonetheless quite difficult for projects sometimes in the conditions they operate in to collect data that they need. And of course, I mean, the main reason we are monitoring, nobody should be just monitoring without any purpose. And the main reason conservation projects should be monitoring is to get information that we can then use for what we call adaptive management, which, as I say, is a buzzword for basically having some evidence for the decisions we make. And in many cases, that's about deciding how to change activities or how to increase or reduce activities based on our success. So before we take some questions from the audience, and I again, do please add your questions to the chat, but I'm just going to ask each panel member in turn. I'm keen to know a little bit more about your experience for having data used in decisions. So all of you got at least some data that you found useful, but we're still seeing that a lot of conservation decisions at local, national, regional, or global levels are not being made on data. And I just wondered what you think we need to do, or at least what needs to be done where you're working to ensure that monitoring data are used more often for informing conservation decisions. And I wonder, maybe could I start with you, Sébastien, as you went first?
Yes, of course. Thank you. It's an excellent question. I mean, everybody knows in Niger and Chad that Addax are on the brink of extinction. So it's quite known. It's quite easy to tell. But after that, you have not so much activities. I mean, human activities in this landscape. So. And when we talk about this landscape, we talk more about oil exploitation or insecurity. So it's very difficult to add conservation issues to all these priorities for a country such as Niger or for Chad, the same. So we need to work closely with the Ministry of the Environment to share a database that we build up and that need to be shared with the authorities, and that can help after that to take decisions. In fact, this database is already existing. We'll build it up. NOE, if I may just a parenthesis, NOE is currently managing the reserve of termite in Tintoma in the framework of a partnership agreement, like a public-private partnership for the next 20 years. And so we build up this database. We use SMART, Stranger. So we have all this data. So we are now we are in the process of working with the ministry to share this database with the authority in order to help them to take decision, or at least to inform the other ministries of the government to know that if they want to develop any activities, or if they are facing any security issues in this region, there are also conservation issues for a species such as the Addax. I can't tell anything else. The more important is to share the information and to have a strong database.
Thank you. Thank you. Tashi, do you have a view from the Bhutanese context? How do we ensure data are used to make conservation decisions?
Thank you for the question. I think I echo a lot of the things that Sébastien just mentioned. I think starting from the beginning of a project, we need to engage people and organizations, including political leaders. I think we need to tell them about the species, why we are carrying out this monitoring, why it is important. And then once we have this data, it's important that we also properly analyze that monitoring is very scientifically sound, that not only just within Bhutan, but when it goes outside the country, it is also accepted by the scientific community. I think we need to get these reliable results out, and then what that results mean for the species and for the country, we need to do that. And I think in case of Bhutan, we do a lot of these monitoring activities, but then these data and then the findings, it remains with the researchers. It doesn't get out. So I think we need to do that as well. We need to involve the media. So for example, if there is the issue of a human-wildlife conflict, it's without any effort, it immediately comes into the national news. Everyone is talking about it. But if it is about the benefit that a tiger brings to the ecosystem and how indirectly a community might benefit or the country might benefit, we're not talking about that. So I think we need to, for a holistic approach, we need to bring these organizations and these important people all together. We need to make them understand what this monitoring means, why it is important, and then I think from there, it is good. It will be good.
Thank you. Soary, from the Malagasy context, do you have what's your thought on how we get monitoring data used more frequently in conservation decisions?
Yes, for us with the Malagasy context, I think. Do you hear me, please?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so the Malagasy context, we need to more communicate with the government, because environment is not a priority in government, and they think that pressure or habitat loss or any conservation issues is not a priority for now. And this year, it is electoral period, so environment, it's very trait, they have many traits, so we need more communicate and explain them, show them the results of this monitoring to make them understanding with us that we have a very high biodiversity who needs to protect and evolve them with us with the conservation. Because, for example, in Menabe and Antimena, we have this Microcebus bear is only place in Madagascar in the world that it exists. So it's very important. And for two, we need to communicate more information that conservation and development can be work together, because they think that environment and conservation is a problem in an opposite of development. So we need to share another approach and make them understand that environment contribute in development in Madagascar, because the forest environment have a high value, economic value too, and it's less communicate that another topic. So we need to communicate, secure more the protected area too, with a different activity, and make sure that community, we, the NGO who conserve the forest and the government together. So after that, maybe we can use the data to help us with this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I mean, this is a key issue, and I know a lot of people, as they heard you, were thinking a lot about the methods. And I think in conservation, especially at the moment, people are all getting obsessed with using the latest technology for monitoring, but they sometimes tend to forget what the end need is, which is essentially that we're having data that are being used. And so I think it was very interesting to hear all three of your take on that. Sébastien, you raised your hand. You had something to add?
Yeah, just I wanted to add something regarding the needs to involve community authorities and communities. It's very important to share also all the informations with them. You need to get them to involve them, to get them as alive. I mean, we are currently managing the protected area, and so we have governance bodies that we organized, and it's very important to have them in board with us and to support us and to help us when we need to discuss with authorities at a national level. It's very important. So I just wanted to add this because it's something that we almost not talk about, and it's very, very important to get them as alive. It's the key part, in fact, in our view in our vision to conserve the species.
Yeah, I think there was a common theme in your responses, which is that and again, I think this is often overlooked, that when we talk about the information generated from monitoring, it's not just for the project manager or managers, that we need to be sharing this more widely. And in some cases, it can be used to justify the work, to build relationships with key partners, to show them value of what you're doing, or why a certain issue needs to be addressed. And of course, local communities are very central to that. But I also heard mentions here as well of government agencies, but also even the media. So we've had a few questions coming in slightly related to that. Tashi, we had a question coming in specifically for you, and you talked about the use of telemetry. Fauzia wanted to know if you're using telemetry at all in the context of human-wildlife conflict. Are you using your radio collaring of tigers to help in any way reduce human-wildlife conflict? You're still on mute, Tashi. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I saw this question. Yes, in Bhutan, so far we haven't used the telemetry data to inform communities about tigers' presence in the nearby forest. That is mainly because of the fear of poaching. And then from the telemetry work that we have done on tigers over the years, currently of all the tigers that we have radio collared, we only have active data from one. From the ones that we collared in the past, I think the battery must have died. So we don't get data from there, but the active one, we see that it is in the forest, but we unfortunately we cannot really share that data with the community. So right now we aren't really using it against human wildlife conflict. Yeah, it's basically with the fear that, you know, when a community in Bhutan, some species like tigers, wild dogs, that frequently comes into conflict with people. For few people that are affected a lot by this livestock depredation, they develop this animosity towards these animals, and then we have had few incidences where these species, you know, have been killed in retaliation, just to avoid that. And plus, we only have right now one tiger that is giving us the data. So yes, we have not used it against human-tiger conflict as of yet.
Right. But it's obviously it is a tool that can be and is in some places. But I think the point you're alluding to here as well, I mean, is different methods are used for different things. In your case, it's a lot about for your management of the project, but in other instances, yes, that is a tool that could be and is sometimes used. But also some of the data are sensitive, and I think that's another thing. That's a whole topic. Maybe we won't go there at this point, but of course, with some of these very threatened species, especially ones that are economically valuable or also sometimes dangerous, there are also sensitivities about the information we need to keep in mind too when we talk of sharing.
If I add one more thing, our communities, they are a lot dependent on the natural resources, you know, in the forest nearby the villages. They are always in the forest collecting non-wood forest products, or sometimes even with their cattle. So more than us, they are aware about the presence of whether there is a tiger in the forest or not. So yeah, they know it already.
Thank you. Another question, Sebastian, we had a question for you, and again, not knowing the geography, but we had a query from Karim about whether you tried to get data from, I understand, neighboring protected areas. There's mention of the Addax sanctuary. I don't know if you saw that one. Do you have a comment on that?
What I can say, okay, of course, we know about the Addax sanctuary in the north of the reserve of Tintuma, in the Air Ténéré Massif, in the Air Massif. And so it seems, unfortunately, that there are no longer any Addax there since many years. It would be a fantastic news if Addax were still present there, but apparently there are no more present in this sanctuary. So I can't tell more about that. As I exposed in my presentation, we know for sure location of the Addax in the desert of Tintuma, near the reserve and at the border, and certainly a third nucleus of population in the north of the Tintuma desert. So we don't have evidence of any other subpopulations in Niger at this moment. But I would be glad if people could come with other information, of course.
Thank you. Soary, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Hi, Soary. So we've had a few comments about using data to engage communities, and you mentioned that you have been working with communities. I just wondered what success you've had with your lemur monitoring. How has that enabled you to engage more with some of the local communities and use the information to help explain and justify your conservation work? Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I think we train community for monitoring, and it's helped them to reinforce their engagement with the animal of their own property, but not for the manager property. So it's a kind of contribution to them to involve in conservation. Because yes, of course, we can have the scientific team all the time, but it's very important to engage them too, because only us can conserve, protect the forest. We need all of them. Fanamby organization have maybe 30 teams who work around the forest, protected area, but community are so many and live inside the protected area. And there's a community. We have managed a protected area of 5 categories. So it's a harmonious landscape. It should be conservation inside a community house. So it's very important to engage them. Of course, the data they collected for the first time, it's not a good data, it's not a scientific data, but our challenge is to raise them, to report them, to have a better data so we can use it for decision. We can use it for the real. We don't use the data sheet specific for the scientific. We don't use data sheets specific like a scientific data, of course, but we use a simple data. We can check when they observe some lemurs during the patrol, so we can use it decision, because we know after analyze this data that we found this species in this area, and it will be helpful for us and for them, and it's make them more important because they participate in conservation. They participate to protect the forest, because first time before it's become a protected area, there was their forest first. So it's important to involve them. So our challenge is to try to training them to move, and finally, maybe after a few years, they will have a good data, like a scientific data.
Thank you. So I think we've got a lot of questions coming in around specific methods, and I don't think with the time we have left we can get into that too much. But I think what the 3 presentations have done is show a nice reflection of the types of methods that we're seeing across the board. So maybe with that in mind, I mean, I'll ask each of the panelists in turn the same question, but I'm very keen to know, you know, based on your experience and the methods you've tried, I mean, what would your advice be that you would share to somebody else, say someone who's just setting up a new species monitoring system? What is the key piece of advice that you would share with them as they set that up? In terms, you know, what do you know about monitoring now that you wish you'd known at the start that you could share with people? And that can include, you know, does that mean, you know, how you chose the methods? Does that affect what people need to think about? So anything you can share on with somebody setting up a new system. So Sébastien, maybe we start with you again.
With pleasure. Regarding our project, for us, the more important thing is to delimitate the research area. It's so huge, it's so difficult to come across. You need to try to get the smaller areas that you can in order to collect data and in an efficient way to do that. I mean, it was so complicated. We at the minimum we needed to explore almost 60,000 square kilometers before being sure to find where the Addax are. And of course, when we found them, it was smaller. It was in a smaller scale. So it's very important to try to delimitate in an accurately way the area that where you want to work, and after that you need to explore and to identify how the protocol that the protocol that you will use to monitor the species, aerial survey, transect, whatever, camera traps, whatever, density, what you want anyway. But first thing, the size of your area of research.
Okay, Tashi, what's your thought? What's your key bit of advice for somebody setting up a new monitoring system?
Yeah, I think first of all, when you are starting to set up a monitoring initiative or activity, it is important that you define your objective very well, why you want to do that monitoring. because when we talk with our friends, you know, our colleagues in the field, they go out just to set up camera traps, and then when we ask them what is it about this, say we just want to monitor biodiversity, and then with the data that they get from that generic monitoring, they try to answer so many questions with so many assumptions. So I think in order to avoid that, I would really advise or suggest somebody who is starting new on this monitoring activities that you define your objective properly, and then you also think long term, because the purpose of monitoring is that you want to see changes, you know, happening, how it's changing over the years. So in order to do that, we have to think long term. We have to think about the funding. Normally here in Bhutan, our friends, again, and including myself, we get small projects. We do it for 2-3 months, or at the max maybe 1 year, and then we forget about it. So I think you need to think about the objective, and then the funding, and then all the resource constraints and all these things.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that's a point that is frequently overlooked, and it relates to some of the points both Anna and I made at the start about the failings of systems. People are often know they're obliged to monitor, especially if they're getting donor funding, or have to report to a government or their boss in whatever context, but people are not always choosing the objectives, and of course that needs to be the start. I certainly see from where I sit too many people choosing the method. They say, okay, I really want to work with drones, I really want to use eDNA, before they've actually first of all identified what question they're trying to answer. And I think people need to get the process right. It's about identifying what questions do you want to answer with your data, and what decisions are going to be made with that. Therefore, what indicators do you need, what's appropriate, and then what are the most appropriate methods to measure that indicator. And then, Tashi, as you say, it's very important to factor in the resources available. And again, different size projects have different budgets. If you've got 10,000 euros for a particular species, you're not going to be doing regular digital aerial surveys for that species. But at the same time, if you're a big multi-million euro program, you should be counting the species, and you should find a way to do that. So Soary, I'm interested to know, what's your take then? What would your advice to be to anybody wanting to set up a new monitoring project?
Yes, for us to, if you want to advise this community, I think we need to secure finance first, because monitoring is it's not cheaper, it's most expensive for Malagasy context, and we need to secure finance first, and we need to share to the government, to the community, to the partner, why we do that, why it's necessary, what's very urgency to make it. So my advice is to continue to make economic values in conservation, in forest conservation, because all the time we have a mine value, we have agriculture values, but for forest and conservation, we don't have enough information. So for us to communicate that is very important.
Thank you. We're getting in the chat, and as I said, sadly we don't have time, and we're going to have to wrap up in a minute, but we don't have time to get into all the specifics. But we've got a lot of questions in the chat about how you choose methods, and people with a particular species in mind saying, well, do you have advice on that? Or we've heard of people using dogs to detect scats from different animals. Should we be looking at using dogs? And again, it goes back to, that's just one method that was mentioned in the chat. But you know, I'm just keen to get a last word from each of you about how you went about choosing your methods, or again, what you would advise, because people are now, they have a whole range of different options. And while budget is obviously one criterion that is very important to choose your method, if you have a small budget, you're not going to be renting aircraft or investing in very elaborate genetic analyses. But at the same time, how do you choose? You still need a method that will give you the data you need. So I'll just give you each a last, if you can make it just a sentence or two on this. Any particular thoughts? Sébastien, I'll come to you again first on advice. I mean, how did you choose your methods, or how do you think people should go about choosing their methods?
Difficulty, just one sentence.
A few more then, go on.
I would say it depends on the species that you want to monitor. If we take as example the Addax that can cover up a huge distance each day, then you need to be able to follow the tracks quite regularly, if not in permanence. I mean, it's very important. So if you do not have this capacity, you are always almost exploring the area. So it's very, it depends. It's almost impossible to answer that. It depending on what you can put in place. For the Addax, the idea, I mean, the best idea would be to have like a permanent shepherd of Addax on camelback, following up the different groups. And so you have always the knowledge of where they are going. And so then you can organize specific protocols, etc., etc. If not, the area is so huge and you lose the tracks quite easily. So yeah.
Okay.
I can't say more than
no,
this.
that's fine. That's fine. Tashi, any thoughts, any advice on choosing methods? Once you've established your objectives, how do people then go about choosing?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly with what is the current state of art that is being used to monitor a particular species. For example, if in case of tigers now, the tiger range countries are all counting tigers in their countries using camera traps, and then just for Bhutan, I am using the DNA, and then now we are trying to come to a global estimate of tigers. I think in order to do that, the method needs to be like in line with what other top researchers or top scientific institutions are using. So in case of tigers, right now the gold standard for counting them is using camera traps and then spatial explicit capture-recapture models. So yeah, so for me, I choose the method based on what is the best out there right now.
Thank you. Thank you. And Soary, you get the last word on this. Any advice or thoughts on how to choose the right method for your monitoring system?
Yes, for us, we are managing protected area. So the best way is defined before when we define the protected area, we have a conservation target or conservation keys. So we know that we protect this because of these animals existing and live there. So in our management plan, we need to survey the species, and we need to share it every year to the community and to the government. So the method, we choose the method after that because they are a target conservation. So we need to monitoring them every year and share the data. So we also make the protocols and training teams and etc. I think that is.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you all raise good points there. And it goes back to, you need to look at what the current practices are. And in some cases, governments already have systems. I mean, and obviously it needs to be goal-based. So it needs to be, if the protected area network has goals or is using a system, you need to integrate with that. But as Tashi says, also using the latest thinking for the given species. And I think that's where we hope today that even though we were looking at larger mammals, that we have nonetheless given some useful reflections for people working on other species. So I'm going to now just quickly wrap up the discussion. So thank you to the three presenters. I think your talks are very stimulating. And I also learned a lot from this follow-up discussion. I also learned that for the next workshop, I want to be wherever Soary is now. That looks much, well, I'm not sure where she is precise this moment, but earlier on, she looked like she had the best venue to be joining a workshop in anyway. So I think what we heard today, we heard some three projects that used a range of methods. They used traditional observer methods and newer technology. We heard about walk transects, but also vehicle transects. We even heard about camel transects. We heard about aerial surveys, camera traps, genetic analysis, radio telemetry. And we also heard 2 of the 3 sites using SMART, which is one of the ranger-based data collection protocols that is getting adopted more and more. I think what perhaps struck me that in each case, each project is using more than one method. And I think that's interesting because that's now becoming, I think, normal. And I think also, as a group, the Species Monitoring Specialist Group, we're also encouraging more and more people to think of using methods together. Even some of the new technologies, each of them has its pros and cons, its advantages and disadvantages. And sometimes it's not just about picking one, but you might want complementary methods that get you the information you need. I think it was nice to see all the projects got at least some data that they needed for management purposes, but all of them faced a number of challenges. And I think, again, it depended on the site, sometimes remote locations, especially locations where there's insecurity or instability in the local human populations as well, that causes challenges. And also people found some methods worked better for them than others for their given species in their given environment. And I think what they all underlined was the importance of having the right capacity and partners in place as well. And I think I appreciated their thoughts on how to use data for decision making. I think it is, again, a key theme coming out was the need to share more information, to communicate your findings, to get more people on board, but also then make sure the people that ultimately influence the outcome of the projects also know what's being found and also understand the same issues as the projects as well. And this came up in the chat, but I also think partnerships are incredibly key. We didn't have a chance to get into that, but frequently the projects that work best and get most data are the ones that are engaging a full range of stakeholders in both data collection and use as well. And I think just one last point to reiterate again too, for a successful monitoring system, you really do need to start with it to make it a goal-based system designed to answer your monitoring questions. So go about it in a structured and organized way. So I'll end there. And so again, I'd like to thank the 3 speakers, but also the numerous participants. I think we had up to about 250 people at one stage, which is a fantastic turnout. And I hope, like me, you found these reflections and the discussion useful in your own work. So Anna, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you so much first of all, for facilitating the webinar so well and inspiring so much discussion. I don't want to take much more time to wrap up. I think that you did that beautifully, but just to highlight perhaps that, that many of us working on conservation face the same issues. I mean, I think that the map that you put at the beginning of the GBIF, showcasing where the data is and where the capacity is really lacking, I think is important. This 14% of data deficient species is pretty high, and it's even higher as soon as we move away from mammals. So yeah, very much agreeing with everything that was said today, of how important defining the objective for this monitoring system is and how to continue learning from each other. Hopefully this platform has served that purpose a little bit. So let me thank you all for your involvement in this webinar, particularly to you, PJ, for facilitating the webinar, our speakers, our interpreters, the whole IUCN team behind the scene, and everybody that joined us. Thank you, everyone. I wish you the very best, and I hope to see you in the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.